I want to talk about how the move towards compassion for our leaders was a very big discussion over the weekend. I mentioned before the tweet coming from a paid up and proud member of the media in Perth from Channel 10, I think, suggesting, hey, Daniel Andrews, are you okay? Just asking on the behalf of everyone else. I think there was a piece, David Spears wrote, it was an interesting piece, up on the Channel 2 website, talking about how the stress and strain of all of this, about literally having to be on top of this all day, every day, is starting to show. There's been all sorts of attempts to basically say, hey, come on, enough of the tough questions. These guys are doing it really tough. It's nice to see, isn't it? All these people coming out and having compassion for our leaders that they really showed. The same people really showed it back in December and January and February, didn't they? I mean, they were really concerned about the mental health of the Prime Minister, weren't they? Very, very... I mean, they've been utterly consistent here, dripping with irony, he says.
Yeah, and it was the PM who, in the middle of the bushfires, lost his dad. I mean, every reason to see an outpouring of some mercy there by the mainstream media. So I think this just speaks further to the fact that we all know the mainstream media are lefties, and here we have the hard left's pin-up boy of a premier here in Australia. So, of course, they're taking a moment to say, mate, how are you doing, you know? On a week where Thursday we saw record number of cases, 725 new cases. Today, record number of deaths in Victoria. Outpouring of mercy just to see how he's going. I'd rather that outpouring go toward the people who are suffering on a daily basis, mentally, emotionally, certainly economically. I just think it's ridiculous.
But James McGrath, how did we become so twisted as a joint that we don't see direct correlation between decisions of government and the consequences of hundreds of cases, 6 weeks lockdown, and today 29 people dying? Instead, there most likely in internet land will be more people trying to find a way to move on and then sort of trying to turn this into and trying to pretend that accountability for the decisions in and around coronavirus is the new version of the Julia Gillard conspiracy theories. Like, come on, this ain't like those dots. There's a straight line.
Oh, there's a total straight line here, and what we're seeing with the left is this blurring of that straight line, that they don't want to be accountability. You just look at the difference between how left-wing governments and the federal government have treated coronavirus. Scott Morrison, we have an inquiry that James Patterson is deputy chair of. The government have only 2 members on that inquiry. It's been going since basically the beginning of coronavirus, calling all sorts of people before it. In Queensland, my home state, Labor aren't having a budget this year. Parliament is barely sitting. There is a parliamentary inquiry, but it's got government members, Labor government members who dominate it. They're trying to make sure that whatever happened with coronavirus wasn't the fault of the government. It's the fault of someone else. You mentioned Peter Beattie before. Daniel Andrews is perfecting this Peter Beattie approach of this sorry, not sorry approach to public policy. And you're right, Peter Beattie, when he stuffed things up, people didn't die, but in Victoria,
correct,
people are dying because of a failure of public policy. And not just general public policy, a decision of that Labor government to award a contract, and I'll be very careful so the lawyers don't start pressing the red button here, to award contracts that tick certain boxes, whether they're union boxes or social diversity boxes, to make sure that the Labor mates were happy. And what is a direct result of that government decision? Well, people dying in Victoria, and you've got a recreation of Berlin in 1961, where you have a city that is devastated by a decision of the government, and no one is being held to account.
Yeah, I mean, again, James, you're living it. You've got to go into self-isolation for the next 2 weeks in order to be able to travel to Canberra to do your job in the Parliament. But, I mean, are we really that screwed up as a joint that we still see Team Red, Team Blue in something like this? And sadly, I thought there was a couple of weeks there, a few weeks there, where I don't think we really saw that. But now it feels like there is this absolute want to return to it. And again, oh, well, he stood there and took questions for an hour is apparently a substitute for accountability for decisions taken. Moving a mid-level person in the bureaucracy sidewards for 2 weeks is hardly the accountability. And I repeat, I keep saying it because these numbers were very stark to me today. 29 people died this weekend.
Paul, you're absolutely right. And let me make really clear, scrutiny of political leaders, even in a time of crisis, is absolutely legitimate and absolutely appropriate. The federal government doesn't shy away from it, but unfortunately some of our state governments have. And forgive me coming off the long run on this one,
Please.
but I don't think Victorians would have been very pleased to hear Mike Baird's leave Brittany alone moment today with Dan Andrews, which sounds exactly like an incestuous political class making special pleading for each other to protect them from that scrutiny. The last thing they wanted to think is that people from across the aisle, from different political parties, are so close and so matey that they have more in common with each other than they do with the constituents they're actually supposed to represent, and that they're part of this bipartisan protection racket. It is outrageous.
Here. Couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, this